stayed after school with me the very last day of school. She could have just gone on her way, but she stayed after school and she made me write a paper that I had not passed in, and so I wrote it, and she passed me for the term. And I've always been grateful to her. She's kind of saved my career then, and I have to say that since that day, I've never missed a deadline. I worked for, more than 9 years in newspapers, and never missed a deadline. I think I have Mr. Coffee to thank for that. And I have to tell you this, she told me one of her secrets. It used to be that, you'd be out there and she'd be talking at the blackboard, writing some goddamn thing, and actually I'd be, want to talk to my friends, and she had it. And even though she was looking at the blackboard, she somehow knew I was misbehaving. She'd take the chalk and quick run and peg it at you, So I asked her, the last thing I asked her, I said, how do you know who's doing what? And she told me her secret. She said, I can see everybody on the reflection of my glasses when I'm looking at the blackboard. I thought that was so cool. John Westcott and I became friends when he moved into my neighborhood when we were in 8th grade. He was on Terrace Street, I was on Oak Street. When we first met, I had bought a model boat from Chase's bookstore. It was a very complex project beyond my skills. There were pieces missing and I just couldn't finish the thing and I could not understand the directions. I was so angry, I tore up the directions, smashed the boat with my fist and threw it away. John rescued it from the trash and without directions, remade it to perfection. Through high school, the only courses I did well in were algebra and plane geometry. I was good at math, John was better. John was the first nonconformist I met. He grew facial hair when it wasn't fashionable. He was an avowed atheist when the rest of us Catholic boys comforted our doubts with the easy agnostic solutions. Over the years, John became a writer of sorts. He wrote an occasional poem and a newsletter for his parachute jumping club. His poem, I'm Not Normal, is a kind of classic of nonconformist thinking. John and his first wife, Mona Skidova, married too young. But they were very good friends to me, and I'll always be grateful for their conversation. I value conversation. To me, conversation that's what friendship is all about. I love talking books with Mona. Like myself, she was an avid reader. I'd already decided that John was smarter than I was, and we both agreed that Mona was smarter than both of us. John and I stayed in touch, mainly through email, up until the last week of his death a year ago. I'll always remember him for his courage. A lot of us guys talked about wanting to be rebels, to be different, to separate ourselves from the conformist 50s. John actually did it. After high school, John and Mona moved to the Boston area. I applied to Keene State and was denied admission after gaining only 6th percentile in the English part of the ACT test. That means that 94% of people took the test did better than I did. And I was told that I wasn't college material. Well, naturally, I believed it. And, I gave up on myself and any potential I might have. I did my 6 months active duty, I did another year, and I worked for the phone company, a job that my Uncle George got me as a central office equipment installer. And it was work that I did not particularly like and that I was not particularly suited for. But the money was good, and I did like traveling all over New England on an expense account. So that's kind of where I was. During this time, my intellectual life was sustained by Bill Sullivan, not the Bill Sullivan of Keene State College that I know some of you know, but the Bill Sullivan of Swansea Center. Bill got a football scholarship at UNH. His sport he soon dropped in favor of track. He eventually was captain of the UNH track team, went on to the Peace Corps in Venezuela, where he was that country's national discus champion. Dayton mentioned about me going from New Orleans here. Well, actually, I drove my little 100cc Yamaha to Laredo, Texas, where I met my friend Bill Sullivan, who had left the Peace Corps, bought a 90cc Yamaha in Panama, and never having driven a bike, went over all those mountain roads. And he and I came back to New Hampshire on those little tiny bikes, and Dayton's right. I had a cylinder, blew a cylinder on going up a long hill in Winchester, and I had to get off the bike and walk it. So it went on one cylinder, it would just barely go until we got to the top hill. Then I kind of coasted into Keene from there. So Bill and I were close friends all through elementary school, and that friendship went on through high school into college and remains today, though he lives with his family in Wisconsin. We used to hang out when he came home between semesters and summers. He put me on to books he was reading for school. We had long discussions about politics, history, sports, and philosophy. Another of my Keene friends was Maggie Ware. Maggie lived on Lincoln Street, near where I grew up on Oak Street. She was a student at Elmira College, and when I worked for Mother Bell, we used to have long phone conversations talking about everything under the sun. When she came home, we would go out and often talk about the books she was reading. So that's how I kind of got the beginnings of a college education from those two. And I had that same feeling that I had years earlier with Connie Priest, I had with Maggie. To this day, I love talking about ideas, people, and especially the writing life with my women friends. Bill and Maggie ganged up on me, kept urging me to give college another try. I finally did reapply to Keene State, and this time I got in. Without their support, I don't think it ever would have happened, so thank you, Bill. Thank you, Maggie. The first close friend I had was Gordon McAllister. Skook and I grew up on Oak Street. He lives today in Rye, New Hampshire. We had lunch a couple of weeks ago when I did a reading in Portsmouth. Like myself, he refuses to retire. And like myself, he writes in his spare time. Skook travels the world and writes about his adventures in feature pieces for Sunday newspapers and magazines. To give you an idea of how far I go back with my friends, Skook and I and Bill Sullivan were hanging around together before my wife of 43 years, Medora, was born. It always strikes me that my closest male friends down through the decades, Skook, Bill, John, Dayton, and Terry, were all writers of one kind or another. You know, we found ourselves. I've been lucky in friendship, and I've also been lucky in love, very lucky. When Medora and I married, I was a 27-year-old college senior at Keene State, and she was a 19-year-old sophomore. Marrying Medora was the best move I ever made. I think somewhere along the line, about when I turned 21, my IQ went up. Maybe from a blow in the head or something, or maybe they took the kryptonite away, I don't know. Anyway, I went from being a lousy high school student to a very good college student. Even though I lacked something, and what I lacked was confidence, belief in myself. My college friends and mentors made a difference, but someone else in this community was just as important. That person was Barbara Shakur, who, with her husband Gabe, published what was then called The Keene Shopper. I didn't really know the organizational structure of the paper, but I think Mr. Shakur ran the business side and Mrs. Shakur the editorial side. No doubt they worked as a team. The Keene Shopper was the first publication to print my work and pay me for it. It certainly was not big money, but it was real money, and the money arrived on time, which is more than I can say from some of my big-time publishers. After I'd published 2 or 3 or maybe more pieces, I can't remember really, Mrs. Shakur asked to meet with me. We had a long conversation. I told her about my ambitions to be a writer. In particular, in those days I wanted to be a poet, and I still do write poetry. She told me about her ambitions to expand the Shopper into a newspaper, not just the Keene Shopper, but the Keene Shopper News, which later would become the Monadnock Shopping News that it is today. And then she complimented me on my writing, and she offered me a job reporting and editing for the paper. I turned her down. I was a full-time college student who already held down a part-time job as a taxi driver. I never did thank her. I didn't realize at the time just what she had done for me. It was a feeling that rose up inside of me, and actually, I'll sound a little arrogant here, but has never gone away. She gave me confidence. If somebody in the business world could believe enough in my talents to offer me a job, I could believe in myself. That was kind of what went on in my head. And so, thank you, Barbara Shakur. There were a lot of other Keene people along the way that helped shape me, that you see before you today, that shaped me you see before me today. That's a very good sentence, isn't it? So thank you all. Thank you, Keene. I'd like to end with a few words about the most important Keene people in my life, and that's my parents. Elf H. Hebert, who like me was born and raised in Keene, and my mother, Jeanette Vackrist. They met at the Pumpelly Hill Mansion in Dublin, where my mom was a nanny for the Cabot children. It's not easy to write a serious-minded novel that is well-written, well-structured, and entertaining. Perhaps I have not succeeded, but I can say I gave it my best shot. I never backed down from a challenge. It takes more than talent and intelligence to write a good novel. It takes grit, hard work, and commitment to the task, not just over a few weeks or months, but for years. And maybe in the end, it doesn't amount to anything. I have published 11 books, but I also have four books that have not been published and probably never will be. The qualities of true grit I learned from my father. He never went to high school, and except for a stint in the Navy, he worked in factories all his life here in Keene. 55 hours a week, 1 week days, 1 week nights, alternating for 45 years. Try that for a schedule. He never complained. He never took a day off. Unlike his sometimes foul-mouthed eldest son, my father never swore, never spoke unkindly of others, and never uttered a racist or sexist remark. The only time he ever spanked me was when he caught me skipping school. The one time I did. How often you just skip school one time and you get caught? Doesn't seem fair. And even then, I could see that the pain on his face was worse than what I was feeling, and he never touched me again. My mother was the best person I ever knew. She was a nurse at Elliott Community and later Cheshire Hospital. We'd walk down the street and she would say, "There's one of my mothers and there's one of my babies." A few weeks before her death at 85, I said, "I know all about your childhood growing up French Canadian in Manchester, and I know what happened after you started nursing school, age 21, the same age I started college. But you never talked about what happened during the 5 years between graduating from high school and starting nursing school." That's when she told me her secret. She'd been in the convent. She never doubted her faith, but before taking her final vows, she understood that her destiny was to start a family. When I left Keene to take a tenure-track position at Dartmouth, I was 48 years old. My wife Eudora and I moved out of Keene to Pearl Street in West Lebanon, where the neighborhood looks a lot like Pearl Street in Keene. Now we're back in the region, living in Westmoreland. I like being in the area. The Sentinel Circulation area, that's home for me. Every once in a while, I visit my parents' graves at St. Joseph Cemetery. There's a plot there waiting for me. Maybe they'll put it on my gravestone. Never got out of Keene. I want to end my talk by reading a poem dedicated to my mother. But before I do that, I want to recommend some books by some local authors. Pearlie, The True Story of a New Hampshire Hermit by Sheila Sweat. Great stuff. Grant's Ferry by David Chase. How Far Away, How Near by John T. Hitchner. A Good Place to Live, America's Last Migration by Terry Pindle. and The Dust Bowl, an illustrated history by Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan, and that book will be available next month. This poem is all more or less true. It's probably the piece of writing that I'm most proud of. It's called My Mother's Donuts. On your deathbed, you told me the stems of the flowers I picked for you when I was a boy were too short to put in a vase. I didn't have the heart to tell you, you said. I remembered you made donuts, the aroma, the heavenly taste when the donut is still hot from the boiling oil. By the time they cooled, the taste was ordinary. I remembered the smell of the sun on my clothes that you hung on the line on a hot summer day, and in the winter, the smell of the air from the clothes steaming off the radiators. You remembered how happy you were with the new electric dryer. In those days, people didn't tie their dogs, you said. Oh yeah, I remember now. They came from miles around, drawn by the smell of your donuts. You always made the mistake of throwing them in the holes. I couldn't help myself. I laughed. You were too weak to laugh. And in the spring, when Dad burned the dead grasses, do you remember that smell? And the color of the new grass growing through the black burn scar after the rain, the brightest green of the new season? There's no waiting for an answer. You shut your eyes. I go back in time, see myself picking flowers, a boy's pure love for his mother, so brief.